Ayubowan. On behalf of the Vishwaniketan International Peace Center, I would like to welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Tara Brach, to the 8th episode of A String of Pearls, a series of intergenerational dialogues. The theme of today's dialogue is pain and healing. Today is the International Day of the Girl Child. We dedicate this episode to the millions of girl children across the world. Today's girl child will be the mother of man tomorrow. On the 2nd of October this month, we celebrated the 152nd birth anniversary of the great Mahatma Gandhi. These powerful words said by Mahatma Gandhi perfectly describe a woman and womanhood. Open quote, Ahimsa means infinite love, which means infinite capacity for suffering. The mother of man shows this capacity in the largest measure. She shows it as she carries the infant and feeds it during 9 months and derives joy in the suffering involved. What can beat the suffering caused by the pangs of labor? But she forgets them in the joy of creation, who again suffers daily so that her babe may wax from day to day. Let her transfer that love to the whole humanity. Let her forget that she ever was or can be the object of man's lust, and she will occupy her proud position by the side of man as his mother, maker, and silent leader. It is given to her to teach the art of peace to the boring world thirsting for the nectar. Close quote. This quote clearly illustrates the utmost importance of protecting and empowering the girl child of today and preparing her to enter womanhood with hope, strength, and confidence. We are holding this series of dialogues to felicitate Dr. A.T. Ariyaratne on his 90th birthday. Dr. Ari donated the entirety of the prize monies he received from the Gandhi Peace Prize to establish Vishwaniketan. Now I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our guest speaker for today, Dr. Tara Brach. Dr. Tara is the founder of the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and has been active in bringing meditation into schools, prisons, and underserved populations. Along with Jack Cornfield, she leads the Mindfulness Meditation Teacher Certification Program, also known as MMTCP, serving participants from 50 countries around the world. Tara's teachings blend Western psychology and Eastern spiritual practices, mindful attention to our inner life, and a full and compassionate engagement with our world. She is also an international best-selling author of the books Radical Compassion and Radical Acceptance. It is indeed a blessing to have you here with us today. I would now like to introduce to you our moderators for today, Tiara and Sanara. Tiara and Sanara have not only been active participants of Vishwaniketan's mini spiritual retreats for children, but they have also helped Vishwaniketan in organizing spiritual retreats for children. With this introduction, I would like to invite Tiara to commence this dialogue.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charika, for that wonderful introduction. So before we move on to our questions, I would like to say that we're extremely humbled and grateful to have Dr. Tara Brach here today for our dialogue. And I hope you're keeping well.
Very much so, thank you.
That's great. And without further ado, we would like to move on to our first question for today's dialogue. Through your experience of blending Western psychology and Eastern spiritual practices, how would you explain the concepts of pain and suffering?
Yeah, so wonderful question. And I love to turn to Buddhist psychology because it makes an important distinction between pain and suffering. And it's captured by the phrase, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So we can't avoid the unpleasant experience, like physical pain of a burn or the emotional loss of a dear one. But pain turns into suffering when we resist it, when we fight against it. It's like a woman when she's giving birth and there's contractions, and if she tenses against the contractions, there's more pain. But if she relaxes and allows the contractions to move through her, then there's not suffering. And so there's an equation that's really helpful, and it's that pain times resistance equals suffering. And then the opposite is pain times acceptance, no resistance, equals freedom. And I know, I love the story of how people in one country would go to a great sage and they'd have to go through the wilderness to reach him, and they'd bring their deep suffering. And he'd swear them to secrecy and ask them a question. And the question was, what are you unwilling to feel? So the way the Buddhists describe it is that when we open to what's here and we don't resist it, there's actually freedom. And I'll share a brief story that really touched my heart. There was an elderly man and he had Alzheimer's. He was losing his memory. And I was surprised at how, with all the physical discomforts and with his memory going, he had so much equanimity and spirit. So I asked him what gave him that. And he described early on in the onset of the disease, he was giving a talk to people and he completely forgot what he was talking about. He didn't know why he was there, completely blank. And here's what he did. He paused, and then he just started naming what was going on. And he said, heart pounding and stomach clenched. Then he said, afraid. And then he said, embarrassed. And each time he'd say something, he would bow. Heart pounding, bow. Stomach clenched, bow. Afraid, bow. And that kept going until he started calming down. And he said, oh, calming down, bow. The people in the group were looking at him with tears in their eyes. And one of them said to him, no one has ever given us the teachings this way. And what had he done? Instead of, when pain came up, he didn't resist it. He just named what was happening and bowed to it. He honored it. And I love that story. And I wanted to share it with you, Tiara and friends, because it speaks to a powerful metaphor that if we can remember the ocean, our Buddha nature, then we're not going to be afraid of the waves. And in the moments that we just, instead of resisting, we just recognize what's here and allow it, we become that ocean. We come back to our true nature, and there's room for the pain that moves through us. It doesn't have to turn to suffering. So that's a bit of a long response to your really wonderful question. I wonder, for you in your own life, have you noticed what happens when you don't fight difficult emotions? Has that come up for you?
Yes, definitely. And I totally agree with the fact the more you tend to suppress things and not accept the type of difficulties and pain you're going through, that's when you suffer as an individual. So for example, we all are home online. And honestly, online learning is so much more stressful than physical school. And I think to a certain degree, like, we need to accept the fact that we are going through a tough time, And if we decide not to accept the fact and prioritize our own mental health, then you're going to go through so much of suffering. So I think acceptance is key here to prevent the type of suffering.
That's a wonderful example too. Thank you for that. Yeah.
That was a beautiful story, Doctor. And I also agree with what Tiara said, since all of us are constantly online. We should face the suffering or the pain much rather than run away from it, because it will keep following us. And we need to fight all those tough feelings and emotions in order to overcome it. And I think that by facing our problems, our emotions, our suffering, we can overcome them with less harm to ourselves than just facing away from them and ignoring the problem as a whole.
Beautiful. And you're exactly right. It's facing it that actually frees us. Thank you both. That helps to hear from you. Yeah.
Thank you, Doctor. With that, I would like to move on to the second question. In the present day, children are largely exposed to the rapidly developing world with advanced technology and sophisticated ideologies. And thus, there's a large generational gap that is being created between children and their caregivers. How do these factors affect the intergenerational relationships? And how can we bridge the gap and strengthen the bonds between generations rather than distance ourselves from each other?
Sonora, thank you for that question. And if it would be okay, I just want to ask you first, maybe to share with me. I'm curious what made this compelling for you. What have you noticed in your personal experience about that gap? What's come up for you?
I personally am really close with my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles. And I often see, although we are close, there are certain things that we may not agree on. And that generational gap is visible, although it doesn't affect us directly, but it's definitely still there. For example, as kids, we are constantly on devices with school projects, and when the adults tell us that we need to go out, see the outside world, we really, at this moment, we don't have the time to do so. And that at this day, I feel like that is the most, like the biggest gap you can see between, adults and children. Technology is what had played a larger role in enlarging the gap between two generations. And I personally feel like the key to it is communication, and communicating with our elders, our siblings. That would heal the gap between generations, and it will make our bonds stronger much rather than ripping us apart. And to me, from what I've learned through Dr. Ari, Dr. Charika, Ms. Neeta, I've learned that communication and talking to each other and spending time with each other is the biggest way of healing this generational gap.
Wow, you have answered the question way better than I would. I'm so impressed. Yeah, I don't know, Tiara, if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
I think similar to that, a lot of children feel like they can't relate to their elders. So there's two different problems, and like the way they view stuff is completely different between the two generations. And I think our generation as teenagers, we tend to be more liberal as opposed to like our elders who are more conservative on certain issues. So there's definitely different ideas, but I think what we need to learn to do is whenever we face problems, we need to learn to take stuff from our previous generations, but also stay true to our own ideologies as well, because I think there's a lot to learn from our elders and use the new technology we have and formulate like better solutions.
Beautiful. Wow, you both have really thought about this a lot. And I want to agree with you that I think that the younger generation's more worldly, less defined in traditional identity. So that means, just to say it out loud, more open to divorce, more open to different sexual orientations and gender identities, and also more into speed, moving fast, not as connected to the earth. I'm just naming all the different sides of it. And also not as experienced now in communicating directly in person. We get caught on our gadgets. So I want to agree with both of you that the main healing is communication. That's what connects us. And also I think we can look at, Sarvodaya, the principle of what happens when people actually get together and do things with each other, in some way are active together and serving, or projects that matter to them, are cooking together, are celebrating together. It's really spending that time that relinks us, telling stories. But I think the basics are what you're speaking about communicating, that the only thing that really bridges the gap is when we know how to listen to each other and both be true to what we need, but also listen. And I just want to share a story. There's an Indian woman here in the United States, and she had an arranged marriage, and she was married for about 7 years, and it was miserable, and she got divorced. And that created a huge conflict with her parents, and so much that they weren't even able to speak together. And so she got some coaching, some support, and then asked them to please let's talk. And when they spoke, she really listened to their fears that she was going to turn her back on all they valued. And she really listened, and she let them know she was listening, and they felt heard. And then that helped them listen to her and hear what a prison she felt like she was in, how it violated her spirit, and how miserable she had been. And she felt listened to by them. We need to feel heard. We need to feel understood. And so we don't have to agree. I think if we can feel heard and understood, there's enough remembrance of our shared values, because even though the values are different in many ways, we still value kindness. We still want to help people that are hurting. There's a shared heart that we can come back to. So I want to thank you both for starting off, because it helped me to tune in a little more too.
I agree with you, Doctor. I think in addition to speaking out about the differences between the generation, I think you always have to listen to each other, and that helps in the process of bridging the gap, as well as there is always common ground between the generations. Like the core values doesn't change from generation to generation, and that's something that we should try to stick by and follow as the youth of today. So thank you for that wonderful answer. So before I move on to the next question, I would like to give a little bit of backstory behind a video I would like to share now. So the Viswaniketan Peace and Meditation Center, we use art therapy as a form of helping victims, girl children of abuse, as well as teenage mothers heal from the type of trauma. So art therapy like drawing mandalas, as well as having metta gardens, really help victims of abuse. And so I would like to share a short video of the work we've done so far. We hope you enjoyed that small video. And I think victims of abuse and pain and suffering were able to actually let out all that pain through the type of art they did. So art therapy definitely helped them overcome the type of pain and suffering. So moving on to the next question, we see that in our world, the girl child is subjected to many forms of abuse, maltreatment, and neglect by both known and unknown people. As a clinical psychotherapist, what advice would you give from a scientific perspective to young girls and to the society in how we can understand the trauma caused by such unfortunate experiences?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you so much for sharing the video. I'm really touched by it because the response to trauma is giving people a way to reconnect to beauty and to goodness. Trauma is known to create a kind of self-hatred in people. We don't always think of it that way. We think of it as fear, anxiety, depression, but there's self-hatred too. And that's perhaps the most toxic, that forgetting of who we really are. And there's a story that I often share, especially with people who have gone through a lot of trauma, and you may be familiar with it, that in Thailand, there was a huge statue of the Buddha. And it was not a beautiful statue, plaster clay, but people loved it for its staying power. And in the 1950s, a crack appeared, and some monks shone a light inside the crack to see what the infrastructure was. And what glowed back was gold. And so they ended up taking off what turned out to be just covering, plaster clay covering, and found it's the largest pure gold statue of the Buddha in that whole part of Southeast Asia. And what's interesting to me, and the monks, I think, believe this, is that the statue was covered with plaster and clay to protect it through difficult times, through attacking armies, so they wouldn't destroy it or steal it. Much in the way that we cover over our innate purity because we go through difficult times. And the more difficult, such as early trauma and abuse and mistreatment, the more we need these coverings to protect us from more assault. And the suffering comes because we start thinking we're the coverings. We think we're the defenses and all the protective strategies, and we forget the gold. We forget who we really are. We forget that radiant, compassionate heart and that spirit. We forget that beautiful garden of metta that's living in each spirit, in each heart. So the pathway out of trauma is to reconnect with the gold. And now I'll just say a bit more from a scientific perspective, that we know that the brain's development, that our capacity for relationship, and I mean relationship with our own bodies, our relationship with each other, with everything, is dependent on healthy caregiving. And it's shaped by the earliest relationships we have. And our most basic needs, we need to feel belonging. We need to feel seen. We need to feel safe. We need to feel loved. And when that's not there, there's so much research that shows, I call it severed belonging, that shows that we can't continue to develop in a way that's healthy. And instead, there are addictive disorders, eating disorders, anxiety, depression, startle response, numbing, disconnection, dissociation, and to me, the most toxic, as I mentioned, shame. A feeling, it's like we get violated, but instead of thinking, oh, something's bad about the parent, we think it's us that's bad when we get violated. And so that's the suffering of it. And I think a really useful way to understand what happens with trauma in the brain, and this comes from my friend Dan Siegel, who's a psychologist, is to imagine that your brain is your fist. You can even just put it up and look, okay, this is my brain right here, right? And if you look closely, this is your brain stem right in here. This is your limbic system. And this part's responsible for fight, flight, freeze, for all the survival approaches. And then this is your frontal cortex, right? So there's the cortex that can think and reason, and the frontal cortex is where we have mindfulness and empathy and compassion, right? So when we are whole and healthy, all the parts are talking to each other. When something scary happens and comes up this nervous system like this, the frontal cortex can say, oh, it's okay. That was back then, now is now, you've been through this before, you're going to be okay. And it down regulates, it calms us down. But what happens when we've been traumatized is we get some fear that comes up here and we're not integrated. So we go like that. It's in English, the words, we flip our lid, we flip open, and we don't have any contact with our executive functioning. We don't have contact with reason. We don't have contact with love. We don't have contact with wisdom. That's what happens when we're traumatized. We lose connection with the more recently evolved parts of our brain. So what that tells us is that if there's been trauma, we need ways of reconnecting and integrating the brain. And what you shared, Tiara, that video, is a very, very powerful way of reintegrating by expressing emotions and by expressing our heart through art and through different art therapies. And there are different ways to do it. I'll name another one. And this is an example from, you probably very familiar with the with Haiti, which has had earthquakes and it's been devastated. That's right, south of the United States. And one of my friends who works with trauma victims went down there, and there was a whole group of women, young women, older women, that had, lost families, lost homes. And so as you can imagine, they were, and I'm doing the flip lid, they were very disconnected and agitated and so on. And what he did with them was, before they even started talking or sharing their experience, they all danced. He had them dancing. He had them moving in rhythm and moving and shaking, because when we're traumatized, we need to move. We need to get back into our bodies. One of the marks of trauma is we leave our bodies. So we have to come back into the body. So after they moved and had some rhythmic moving and they did some singing, then they could, in a quiet way, start sharing their trauma and finding out, I'm not alone. Others experience this too. And there's such power in knowing I'm not alone. It's not my own deficiency. It's not my own personal tragedy. It's the trauma that we're all sharing right now. And I've worked with many people, having them start to come back into their bodies and their hearts, because trauma is severed belonging. The most important key, though, and this is back to the Golden Buddha story, is helping a person trust their goodness. And again, with whether it's young girls or older women or anybody that's been traumatized, if we can help each other remember our goodness, if we can be mirrors for goodness, then it helps to integrate the brain and heal the spirit. So I hope that's a little bit helpful on this one. And I wonder for you, if there's anything else that you might want to share that you have found helpful in with girls that are traumatized. Anything else you'd want to mention?
Doctor, I think that through working with these girls and talking to them, I think what they want most is love and acceptance, to be seen and to be heard, and to let them know that they're not alone. We are all human beings, regardless of what we've been through, and sharing that loving kindness, regardless of where they come from and what experiences they've been through, and sharing that love and compassion and understanding is how we can help them overcome that trauma, and also connect with them as human beings in deep levels through all these wholesome practices.
Mm-hmm.
With that, I would like to move on to the fourth question for today. Due to COVID-19, many people have experienced a great deal of personal trauma. How do we, as present-day children and as future adults, heal ourselves from all these experiences while also help in the healing of others?
It's such a question all over the world right now. And there are many ways that trauma is expressing itself right now. It's the horror of suddenly losing people we love, and the powerlessness, you know, when somebody goes to the hospital that you can't be with them, or it's the living with the uncertainty. And for many people that are already have trauma in their body, it gets triggered, so they're re-traumatized. So the most important thing is something that you, Sonara, just named, which is the importance of knowing that we're not alone, that people feel that container of love and of safety to be able to hold hands in it. And we need to be really authentic in our communications. The more I have found, and I have a monthly gathering online, and the more people who are traumatized are able to say out loud, and this is a very caring, supportive group, what's going on for them. And then hearing even through the chat, oh yeah, me too, I know what you mean. That it creates a field that's truly healing. The other thing I want to mention is the self-compassion that's needed. You know, in Buddhism, the heart of Buddhism is compassion. And the heart of compassion is compassion for the life that's right here. And we often skip over that. You know, we somehow or other think it's more virtuous to be kind to other people. But what we don't realize is that if in any moment we are turned against ourselves, we're judging ourselves, we can't really fully love others. There's going to be a part of us that's held back because we're turned on ourselves. So we need to start with ourselves and really offer all the acceptance and forgiveness and love in the world right here in the moment. I know one woman I know very closely who has been working in hospitals during COVID, which has, you know, been very, very stressful. And she's had many patients die. And she's also had to be the communicator with the families, and it's been really painful. And then she gets home and she's got children of her own and finds that she doesn't have patience, she doesn't have energy, she's not being the mother she wants to be, and she turns on herself, and she's at war with herself for that. So what she's had to practice, her main practice through all this trauma, has had to be, she puts her hand on her heart whenever she can pause and remember. She breathes, and she tells herself, it's okay, trust your goodness, trust your goodness. And that self-love, that self-metta gives her increasingly the resilience to be imperfect, and it's okay, it's all right. You know, she knows her goodness. So I would say that it's key for all of us when we're going through these traumatic times, whatever the level of personal trauma, have a daily practice, even if it's very, very short, where we pause and we bring our attention right to the moment. Maybe breathe for a few minutes, say prayers, offer metta to ourselves, offer metta to others. Ideally, go and walk somewhere beautiful. We need that. And to choose a message for ourselves that is healing. It could be simply, may I be happy? May I be free from inner and outer harm, whatever the message is. I know for myself that during this period, I have a meditation at the beginning of the end of each day. The end is short because I'm tired, but I'll meditate, and then and when I'm done meditating in the beginning of the day, I'll just pray, may I be kind, may I be kind to myself and to all I touch. And then I'll go through my day, try to be as aware as I can. And at the end of the day, I'll sit quietly for a bit, and I'll sense how much kindness has there been. And let's say I got forgetful and I wasn't the way I wanted to be. I don't judge myself. It helps me to remember, oh, well, tomorrow, may I be more present, more kind. So it's a way to have our whole life held in that aspiration towards kindness. So that's a little bit from me. I'd be curious to hear from both of you what you're finding helpful in yourselves and in others in navigating all this trauma that we're in the midst of.
I agree with you, Doctor. I think we're going through extremely tough times, and especially as teenagers wanting to go out, meet our friends, not having that physical interaction really hurts us. And it's extremely, I think it's a very difficult period everyone is going through in general. So what helps me is that most often than not, my days are extremely busy, packed with online schooling, as well as extracurricular activities, all done through Zoom. So what really helps me to calm down and take care of myself, and I'm so glad you highlighted that through your answer, how it's important for us to start loving ourselves and then reach out to the rest of the world and others around us. I think it's extremely, the way I do it is that I take a small box. I live in close proximity to Vishwaniketan, the meditation center. So there's a lot of trees and birds and butterflies. So I go in the evening and I always spend 15 to 20 minutes there just sitting and observing nature. So that really helps me calm down. And that's to me.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, and you, Sanara, what have you noticed?
I also agree with Tiara that all our days are jam-packed with online classes and other extracurricular activities. I found time for myself. I usually go to my grandmother's house, Dr. Ari's house, which is a 2-minute walk, less than 2-minute walk from where I live. And usually we all sit down next to Sia, Dr. Ari, and Miss Nita Achi during the evenings, and they would tell us stories of how they started off Sarvodaya and Sia, how his initial build up to being the great person he is, stories from when he was a teacher, when he was a child, how his grandma was. So to me, learning all those stories about the past and about their lives in the past and going through old albums and seeing how carefree their lives were, that has really brought me so much happiness. And I think I find most of my happiness by interacting with Dr. Ari, Dr. Charika, and my cousins. And that brings me so much happiness that I feel like we all need that moment to escape from whatever online lessons, classes we have, and interact with as many people as you could, learn as many stories as you can. That's what I think is how I find my escape from all the trauma.
I love both of your responses because they really speak to how much we need to nourish our spirit, and whether we're nourishing our spirit in the quietness of being in nature. I mean, we are nature. We need to be in the larger natural world, or with the nature of other beings, speaking with them, being with them, hearing their stories. we need that nourishment so we can be resilient in our world and then open our hearts and help and serve other people. So I'm inspired by what both of you have said. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor, for your answer as well. So moving on to our final question in today's dialogue. In your book, Radical Compassion, you have expressed the importance of saying yes to life through the RAIN practice. We would very much like to take a moment to learn this insightful and enlightening practice from you.
Well, thank you. RAIN is an acronym, and the English words that go with it are R for recognize, A for allow, I for investigate, and N for nurture. And each one of them is helping to build mindfulness and compassion. And the more that we move through it, the more we enter what's called after the rain. And just the way in a real rain, the moments of the flourishing come afterwards, the fruit. After we do those 4 steps is when we experience what you might sense as an enlargement of our being, where we sense we're no longer stuck, we're resting in something larger, really resting in our whole Buddha nature. And so what I'd like to do is I'm just going to walk you through it. And anyone who's listening, you might explore it also. Just take a couple of minutes. And if you want to close your eyes or lower the gaze a bit, that's great. And you might take a few full breaths just to bring yourself fully here in a relaxed way. And you might scan your life and sense if there's anywhere that you feel you get triggered, where you'd like to have more balance, open-heartedness, equanimity. It might be in a relationship with somebody where there's a bit of conflict. It might be something to do with work or school. It might be something to do with health. But wherever you find that you get maybe either fearful, anxious, angry, or you get triggered. And let the situation come to mind that most shows you when that's happening. If it's an argument with somebody or disagreement, to sense that person there and the look on their face, the words that are being said. Or if it's a feeling of anxiety about school or work, the situation that brings it up. It might be fear of something that's coming up in your life, and just to imagine that. Then RAIN starts with the R. Recognize means that you just notice what's the emotion that's strongest right now. And mentally whisper it. It might be anxiety. It might be anger, hurt, fear, judgment, embarrassment. So just mentally whisper, that's the way we recognize, naming it. And the A, or allow, means that for now, just let it be. You don't need to judge it or fix it, not to ignore it. Just let it be there. It's like it's a wave in the ocean. It belongs. You might even say, this belongs. Doesn't mean it's going to be here forever, just for now. So we allow with the A of RAIN, and then the I of RAIN is investigate. And it's not a mental investigation. More it's to sense, well, when you're having this experience, what's it like in your body? You can check your throat, your chest, your belly. You might notice when this is going on, what are you believing about yourself or about somebody else. Maybe you're believing about yourself that you're failing in some way, or that you're going to fail, or that you're not worthy or lovable. Or maybe you're believing about somebody else that they couldn't respect you or care about you if they're acting this way. Just to notice what you're believing. And most important, notice how that lives in your body. Again, feel your body. And sometimes it helps as you're sensing what's going on in your body to let your facial expression show the emotion, even your posture. That helps you get in touch with what's really going on inside, because the issues are in the tissues. It's actually in your body. So it helps also to put your hand on your heart, to keep your attention in the body. And let the touch be light, let it be tender, as if you're actually offering care. You're beginning the nurturing right now with your hand on your heart. It's very powerful to put your hand on your heart. There's a lot of science that shows that. And then to begin to nurture, sense what's most needed right now. How does this vulnerable part of you want you to be with it? Does it want acceptance? Forgiveness? To feel some safety? To feel love? Compassion? And just call on your highest self, your wise, compassionate heart, and sense that from that place you can offer what's needed. And you might send a message, whatever message is going to help the most. It could be that you're sending yourself the message, it's okay, trust yourself. Or I'm here and I'm not leaving. It could be, if there's fear in there, that you're saying, thank you for trying to protect me, but I'm okay right now. Whatever message, whatever reminder helps that part in you that's reacting. And if it's hard to offer a message to yourself, you can imagine it coming from some larger source, from a person that you know loves you, that you trust. A grandparent, could be a good friend. It could be a spiritual figure. It could be a deity, a formless awareness, just some larger source. And feel the loving bathing you right now. Explore that. Let it come in and bathe you. Let the nurturing really come into your heart. It's as if your spiritual heart is holding, cradling, and loving your human heart. And then these last few moments, what we call after the rain, notice the quality of presence that's here. You can kind of sense a little what has shifted. If you started out feeling like you were an anxious self or an angry self, notice the quality of presence, who you are now. Notice maybe more spaciousness, more kindness, more awareness. And you can trust this as more the truth of who you are than any changing mental state, emotional state, or sense of self. Any story of yourself is smaller than this. Trust it. It's your true nature. So we close with that, with trusting the gold. And as you're ready, feel free to open your eyes, move around. bringing yourself back. And maybe if you'd be up for it, Tiara and Sonara, to maybe just share a little bit of either what was challenging or what you want to remember.
Thank you so much for that wonderful exercise. I think it really helped us because we're coming to the end of our day. And so today has been a really tiring, long day for me. So it really helped me relax. And I couldn't think of a better way to reconnect with myself to end this day. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Actually, I too agree with Tiara. It was such a refreshing exercise after a long, long week. We went Friday now. So Friday night as a refresher from all that's happened in the past week. This has been a really nice awakening and also refreshment to us.
That so gladdens my heart to hear. It's a pleasure to share it with you.
Thank you so much for that. And now we've come to the end of our dialogue, and we've had a really interesting dialogue today on pain and suffering. And I'm sure everyone definitely would be able to learn something off this dialogue. So thank you so much, Dr. Tara Brach, once again for being here with us today. It was truly awesome to have you here, and you really inspired us all. Thank you. Coming to the end of this successful dialogue, I would like to invite Dr. Adi to share a few of his words with us today.
My dear Dr. Tara, what you said, I can experience at this moment because I am in pain, but I am not suffering because I welcome the pain and I understand it. I thank it for giving me that experience. Thank you very much for all the blessings you have given to me. I give you the same blessings, the blessings of the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and all the Devas, because you are young, you are energetic. You have to do a great job for years to come. So I wish you all the mental, spiritual, physical, social strength to continue that, your good work, which is very much needed for this divided, for this ignorant world. Thank you very much for wishing me, and I thank you very much for the contribution you made today by your wisdom. Thank you again very much. Wish you the very best.
Thank you, Dr. Ari, for those wonderful words. Now I would like to invite Dr. Charika for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Tiara. That was just wonderful. What an enriching 1 hour. I too had a very long day. I think, Dr. Tara Brach, your embodied presence really deeply touched all our hearts and minds. You resonated the spirit of what you were sharing with us. As a nation that has had its, many challenges, many traumatic kind of historical sort of experiences. A 33-year-long war, many lives were taken away. Then 2005 with tsunami, thousands of people lost their lives and belongings. And also we have also had many other social challenges when we opened the entire country to globalization or global economy in the 1970s, and getting exposed to all the most modern kind of things and gadgets and way of life. I think trauma and healing is such an important subject for us Sri Lankans. I always say that, in a way, I wonder whether we can call our country a kind of a traumatized nation, because we have had too many, traumatic experiences. So I think you have brought in the spiritual dimension, the Buddhist perspective, as well as the scientific dimension. And in our work through Vishwaniketan spiritual retreats and programs, we have always tried to blend the spiritual dimension with the scientific approach, because it really shows how important it is for us to understand the science behind the working of our brain, and especially how to connect with our body when we are traumatized and we are sort of lost in thought. We forget to connect with our body. I think, Dr. Tara, you have been a great source of inspiration, and being a teacher, like I have been following, your teachings, your online sessions, and also applying those teachings in our work, especially with traumatized teenage mothers. So you continue to be a great source of inspiration and guide to Vishwaniketan, and we really hope that one day we could, see you here in Sri Lanka, and for you to share your wisdom and insight with many more Sri Lankans. So I would like to express our heartfelt, sincere thanks to you on behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Etiariratna Charitable Trust. And also I would like to thank Dr. Ari for being here with us, at least for the major part of this discussion, in spite of whatever the challenging circumstances he's going through right now, and also Tiara and Sanara for, I think today's dialogue was a truly an intergenerational kind of a dialogue, because I think you beautifully engaged with Tara, and Tara engaged with you all. I think as a child rights lawyer, I would say from a child-centered and child rights perspective, so it was child-friendly and child-centered. So thank you so much, Tiara and Sanara, for moderating this session. And I would also like to thank Christy for coordinating with me, for the past, I think, 2 to 3 months. And also I would like to thank Kala and also Madhushan. Madhushan has been carrying a huge workload for the past couple of months, and I'm sure he must be waiting till November or February next year until we complete this episode, because but I have seen Madhu doing everything with so much love. I think Dr. Tara said, if we resist pain, if we resist suffering, then we suffer if we resist pain. But we can have freedom if we honor and bow to our pain and suffering. So I think Madhu has forgotten the fatigue and all that, because he's doing this with a lot of love and compassion for humanity. So I would like to really add a very special note of thanks to Madhu. If not for Madhu, I don't think we would have continued this session since February. So thanks so much for everything. And once again, we wish you all the best in your spiritual endeavors. May you be blessed with good health and happiness and love to continue your journey and share your insight and freedom with many more people, Dhamma seekers. Thank you so much. May all of you be well, happy, and peaceful.